So if you believe your best days are ahead of you, do you believe that?
Yes.
Well, then I don't have to make the second point. Let's get into it. Matthew chapter 4, verse 1 says this. Some of my favorite verses in all the scriptures. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days and 40 nights he fasted and became very hungry. In preparation for his ministry and passion, Jesus fasts and prays for 40 days and 40 nights. We are on day 6 of 40 days and 40 nights of fasting here at Risen, which is pretty cool. We're part of the ministry of Jesus, right? Jesus spends 40 days preparing for his ministry, and then on day 41, he starts it, and 2,000 years later, we're continuing it. And we're about to enter into a new phase for us, and so we're spending 40 days preparing for it. And so I just wanted to let you know a couple of things that we're doing right now that maybe you knew about, maybe you didn't. You can jump in at any point if you didn't catch the first 6 days of it. There's 34 left. That's a long time. So we're reading Mark together, reading the book of Mark, not Matthew, although that's where we're teaching from. If that's confusing to you, let me just remind you, it's all the same story. So we're in Mark because it's a little shorter. We're going to read Mark together because it kind of just covers the ministry. It doesn't cover any of the early days before Jesus and the prophecies and some of the things that we're just in. So we're reading that together. You can jump in with us, read about a half a chapter a day. It posts to social media every morning. 7 a.m. it posts like, here's what we're reading today, and here's what we're actually praying through it, which is kind of a cool thing. That if you wonder like, how can I pray for my church today? Well, if you check out the reading on that day, you're likely to find something. We see everything we see Jesus doing, we're praying it. Like, let us do that. We see Jesus healing a leper, going to someone that no one else would go near, touching someone, and we pray, God, let us be a church that does that. Let us be a church that goes to the people who nobody else will go to. Let us be a church that will draw in people that aren't welcome anywhere else, right? We see Jesus preach the gospel and early on in Mark, and crowds, floods of people come in, and there aren't enough seats where he's teaching and preaching. And of course, we want to pray that. Of course, we want to believe for that. We would say, Jesus, we're in that minute. We're doing that ministry. Let us see something like that. And so you can do that with the other thing, fasting and praying for 40 days. Over 40 individuals now have committed to fast at least a day to pray for Risen Church. They're committed to fasting something every day. Today's Scott's Day, isn't it? Scott is fasting and praying on your behalf today, praying for this church. And so every one of you in the room, I believe, is covering at least one day during that. And it's really a pretty cool thing to do. And then also, we've invited you to do that in your own life too, for the whole, the 34 days that are left. If you find something that you can cut out that would remind you to pray and fast for your church, we'd love for you to do that with us. So that's what we're doing in this time. Let's look at what Jesus does. We're told that Jesus, while he's fasting, some significant things begin to unfold. And I'm going to move through this really quickly because I think there's some specific and interesting things in this that I want to cover. And so I don't want to get caught up too long on any one part of it. During that time, verse 3, the devil came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread." I'm going to talk about a part of that next week because every one of the temptations that follows here, you may know about Matthew chapter 4. There are 3 temptations that Jesus actually faces, 3 types of temptations. I don't believe that means that he was specifically tempted 3 times over the course of 40 days. I think these are just sort of characterize the types of temptations that come up over and over and over again. And I think they sort of characterize and categorize the temptations that we all face over and over and over again. So for 40 days and 40 nights, he's tempted with these 3 things. The first one is essentially, the devil, it's almost like he's trying to be helpful, right? He's like, you're the Son of God, you're hungry, make bread, eat bread, right? It's almost like it wouldn't be terribly surprising if the next thing that Jesus says is, oh yeah, totally forgot. I could make bread and eat bread. I'm hungry. I could make bread, eat bread. Good suggestion, devil. And many of us would never even really think much of it, right? We would just be like, it's kind of a weird story. I guess the lesson is like, talk to your enemies. I don't know what we would do with that. but it wouldn't really be that strange. It's a very odd temptation. It's a very confusing one for us, and I think that's where we're going to find the real value of this message today is how subtle and strange it is that the devil, what he's trying to pull here and what he's trying to play here is something that we face regularly, and especially in a season like this. But Jesus told him, no, the scriptures say people do not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. So Jesus thwarts the devil's first attempt to knock him off balance by making this a spiritual matter and not just a physical one. That's what he does. Jesus essentially says, like, sourdough, small stuff. This isn't about small stuff. Make sense? The devil says, hey, I see you're hungry, have some bread. And Jesus says, you think I'm out here for bread? Bread is small stuff. I'm not here for small stuff. I'm not here for bread. Of course he could make bread. Of course he could do this, but he's doing something in this 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus is doing something in this moment that is infinitely bigger than turning stones into bread. He's doing something. If he changes stones into bread, he feeds himself for a moment, right? But he's here to change everything for everyone forever. And I want you to consider today, what small things do you have in your life that you could use for big things to change the world? What temptations do we face every day to use small things for ourselves, small things that we could put our own attention, our own energy into, and no one would even fault you for it. No one does fault you for it. Again, if Jesus turned stones into bread, we just say, oh, cool trick, Jesus. Nobody faults you for that. But Jesus says instead, no, I'm not here for small things, though. Of course I can. But that's not why I'm here. So in your sermon notes, I want to offer you three ideas, three small things that I would suggest that we could trade for big things in this current season. That's maybe even the title of my sermon, if I have to give it a title, which I don't, but I will. And we call it Small Things for Big Things. That's really important to me as a pastor. It's one of the reasons I started Risen Church, is so I don't have to give every sermon a title unless I want to. Today, it's called Small Things for Big Things. If Jesus makes bread in the desert, he satisfies his hunger. And that's the end of a strange story. It's a small thing. But the miracles that follow because he doesn't are infinitely bigger. And I believe we have the opportunity to do the same in our own lives. The first thing that we all have is time. First blank is the word time. You don't have an infinite amount of time, but you do have some. And I'd like for you to consider how time is really a small thing that can be used for big things. Every day we choose to do small things with time. We watch a little TV. We spend a few hours or days on social media. We take a nap. We eat some ice cream. We golf. We shop. We repeat, right? We have hours upon hours that we can't account for at all. We're like, what did you do from like 5 p.m. to 7 p.m.? And you say, I legitimately don't remember. I don't know. I don't know what happened to that 2 hours. Feels like we should have been eating dinner, but we didn't eat dinner until 7:30. I don't know what happened. It's gone. But it's a small thing. What would happen in our lives if we began giving an account for all of our time? If we started saying, like, my time matters. I have a limited amount of it, and it's a small thing that I could trade for big things. Are there things that we spend time doing that we could say, that's a small thing, and I could do something bigger with that? What would happen if we stopped right here and decided, I'm going to spend some of my time on bigger things? If my time is like these stones that Jesus is holding, it's completely within my authority, completely within my power to do with whatever I please. I want to spend some of it on big things. I want to trade that small thing of my time for some bigger things. Every day we have multiple opportunities to exchange small things like media and leisure and downtime for time alone with God, just for starters. I told you before, I've got a little bit of a YouTube habit. It's a problem for me. That's my thing. I'm not really a social media guy. If you ever see me post on social media, that was a conscious business decision that Drew made. Even if it appears to be just like totally natural. Never in my life have I seen something and thought, I need to take a picture of that so my ex-girlfriends in West Virginia can see it. Like, I've never looked at myself in the mirror and thought, selfie for my cousins who I never talk to look at. Like, I'm not wired that way, but I am wired for YouTube. YouTube is my drug, right? That is where I go. On any given day, I could get stuck in a spiral. You know, you watch one video, it's an interview or something, the video at some point mentions predatory animals, and then as soon as it's over, YouTube says, we notice you've just watched a video about predatory animals. Would you like to watch a video now of a ninja fighting a bear? To which I respond, of course I would. That sounds awesome. And then 3 hours later, I've followed this down and I've consumed at least 45 minutes of North Korean propaganda, and I've watched old middle-aged hands open children's eggs with toys in them, and I'm brainwashed completely, and I have no idea what happened to the last 3 hours, right? This is something that happened. And so in this season of time, one of the things that I'm trying to do specifically, and I would encourage you maybe ask yourself about every time before I open the YouTube app on my phone at all, before I go to YouTube on my computer at all, I'm asking myself, is there something bigger that I could do with the next 3 hours? Is there something bigger that I could trade that small thing for? Nobody's going to fault me for that. Of course not. If you fault me for watching a ninja fight a bear, then you have no soul and you have no inner child anymore. If you don't want to see that, if you can't relate with that desire, then I don't get you and you don't get me. But this is something, it's a small thing that we're able to sort of trade and say, like, isn't there something bigger? Could I do something bigger with it? Could I reach out to somebody and just maybe encourage somebody in a text message or a phone call? Could I pray in this time? And then every week, you have an opportunity to exchange a small amount of your time to serve the big thing that is Jesus' church. I mean, we've never made this a matter of pressure. We're not going to start today, especially with those of you who are already serving. But I do believe that this is something that we get to do hey, I get to trade the small thing of one Sunday a month, 2 a month, 3 a month, and whatever it is that you have elected to give of your time and your energy and your gifts and your talents to say, yeah, it's a small thing. It's a small thing. And I'm not saying it's a small thing because to me it's a huge thing. To me it's a massive thing that you would show up hours early, that you would set up, that you would serve in kids ministries during service, that you would serve tearing down during service, that you would serve singing and playing music for free, that you would do these things in the media booth, that you would greet and you would hand out cards to people. Like that, it's a huge thing to me, but also in the grand scheme of things, it's also this small thing of our time and our energy and our talent that we get to exchange for the big thing of maybe changing somebody's life forever. And it's happened. For a year now, we've exchanged the small thing every Sunday for the big thing of people's lives being changed forever, families being set on a different trajectory than ever before, kids being raised in church that were not going to be raised in church if Risen Church didn't exist. There are families that just weren't going to go. There are kids that were just never going to be exposed to it. But because we exchange that, I mean, those who serve in kids, for me, is one of these. I mean, it's just such a great example of it. Serving in every capacity is incredible, but it's such a good example to think about. Every week, we're showing up early. We're doing the things that we do to prepare throughout the week for it. And then choose to spend time with kids who aren't going to say thank you. and maybe aren't going to listen to a single thing that you say whenever you ask them to obey and ask them to listen, and maybe are going to spit on you, and maybe you're going to throw up on you, and maybe all of these different things. And at the end of it all, if you were to ask anybody who ever serves in that, why do you do that? Because they matter. Because these kids matter. Because their future is our future. It's a small thing to give that time and that energy to it. You ask the same thing of anybody who serves in any capacity. That's what you'll discover. Why you come early and set this stuff up? Why Why do you bother with all the cables and all the wires and the lights? And why do you bother with all that? Why do you do all this stuff? This is a small thing that I get to exchange for the eternal big thing of God's church, changing people's lives forever. I mean, my time, it's just like stones that I could turn to bread and eat them, and nobody would fault me for it, but I'm choosing not to. Because I'm not here for small things. I'm here for bigger things than that. And I'm so thankful for you doing that. The second thing I would say to you, and this may be like the obvious direction of this message, but the second thing that I would say is money. Small thing we can exchange for big things. Money. None of us have an infinite amount of money, but we have some. And I know that many of you are already partners and already giving. But I want you to be reminded, and I want you to be thinking about how this is, every time you give, I want you thinking of this. I want this to come to mind for you. This is a small thing that I get to exchange for a big thing. This is a small thing. No one would fault me for not giving to a church, especially here. We don't pass a plate. We don't pass a bucket. No one would even know. No one would guilt you into it. No one would pressure you into it. Nobody would try to use that against you. No, we would not deny you any of the ministries of this church, even if we checked the giving records first. It's not how it works for us. But it is a small thing that we get to, I mean, with the exception of a few things, like taxes and medical expenses, most of us do with our money whatever we decide. It's within our power to do it. It's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. Money's a power we've all been given. We've never tried to force people into giving. But I do want to invite you on this. I do want to remind you what this is all about. Paul talks about this small thing. We exist because of the generosity of people just like you. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7, if giving is something you're sort of curious about, maybe you've started and you thought like, well, how much? Like what should I be giving? Like how do you do that? If we wanted to start as a family giving regularly, what would it look like? Well, Paul says this, and I think 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9 are some of the best. It's really about the most practical, straightforward explanation of what giving in a church really should look like. And in verse 7, around the middle of that whole exchange, he says, you must each decide in your heart how much to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure. If somebody tries to guilt you into giving, don't do it. That's what Paul said. Paul says if somebody guilts you to give to God's work, don't give. If you're giving because you feel guilty, don't give. Don't do it. That's not giving from the right place, and it's not even giving. If you're giving from guilt, you're purchasing, not giving, right? I'm trying to pay for something. I'm trying to buy a ticket to heaven. I'm trying to buy a blessing. I'm trying to buy if you're giving out of guilt or shame or some sort of pressure, it's not giving, it's buying. And so Paul just says, don't give because anybody pressures you to. Decide in your own heart how much to give. I'm sure you're familiar with the principle of tithing. We don't talk about it a whole lot, but a lot of people practice that here. And I'm a proponent of it, of at least thinking about it. Several people here give 10% of their income. They've shared with me to Risen Church every month, at least that. Many people give more. Many people give less. Personally, I believe 10% is a good place to start thinking about it. I think it's a good target to look at and say, that's about maybe where we should be aiming to move towards. For most people, it's just a good place. And I also think that tithing is sort of a through line in the scriptures. It starts in Genesis chapter 14. Abraham, before there's a law, before there are any commands other than don't eat the fruit of the tree, Abraham tithes. And then it's actually emphasized later on in Matthew chapter 23 by Jesus. Jesus seems to give his stamp of approval on it as well. In Malachi chapter 3, right in the middle of that, we're told God invites us to bring our tithes to the church. And if you do, he says, I'll open the windows of heaven for you. I'll pour out blessings so great you won't have enough room to take it in. He says, try it, put me to the test. So that's all I'll say about that is if you're considering giving or if you're considering how much should we and you want to ask this question that Paul asks, that Paul says, hey, you should each decide. I think a tithe is a good place to start asking that question and thinking about it and test him. I mean, that's what God says. Like, try it. See what happens, right? Try it. You don't have to. It's not the cost of admission to heaven, but try it and see what happens. And then Paul continues, for God loves a person who gives cheerfully. He's essentially saying, get yourself a joy box. And God will generously provide, and it was a joke, guys, get yourself a joy, cheerfully. God will provide all you need. You'll always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with us. Every month, we write checks for things and we pay electronically for things like mortgages and groceries and Netflix. And all of those things are good and necessary and fine, but they're still small things. All of them, right? They won't matter in 100 years. That's all I really mean by a small thing for this. I mean, when I have an opportunity to give to a church, for me, it's an opportunity to give to something that will exist past me. When I pay my mortgage, important, necessary, provides my family a place to live for 30 days. That's what it's a small thing at the end of the day, and you got to do it. But I'm just saying, like, every time we give to a church, though, I have so many things I've spent money on in my life that I don't even remember. So many things I spent money on that I regret. And yet, whenever it comes to giving to churches where I just attended, to churches where for seasons of my life I wasn't even going to church, but I'd send it somewhere. Like I'd find somewhere. I've never once regretted giving to that. That's the one through line of my life. It's a through line in the scriptures. It's a through line in my life that I would say that's part for me. That's a small thing. That's the stones that I hold in my hand that I could turn to bread for myself, or I could say, well, some of this I want to give to other people and to moving the gospel forward. Does that make sense? I get real rambly whenever I talk about money because I'm doing my best to never guilt and pressure and never make it feel like none of this is a cry for help. None of this is a plea for help. We don't operate like that. God takes care of us. But I always want to invite you into it. I want you to test it. I want you to try it, and God wants you to try it. And so it matters to me in that way. And the third thing is this, and Mark and Marcy, thanks for coming back in. If you guys want to come up, we're going to end with a song here in just a moment, just to give you a moment to reflect on this and consider the third thing, the third blank that I would say, the small thing that we can exchange for big things in our life. And it's going to seem a little strange, but give me a second to explain it, is prayer. The third blank is the word prayer. Perhaps you don't think of prayer as like a stone that you hold in your hand that you could use for yourself or it could give it away for bigger things. And maybe you don't even think of yourself as a prayer. Like that's not really my thing. But let me explain this. Prayer is an authority that God has given to us. It's an access that he's given to us through Jesus. And you can talk to God about anything, anytime. It's yours to do with what you please. No one will fault you for anything you choose to do with prayer. Our focus in prayer often becomes extremely self-centered, extremely small. And there's nothing wrong with that. God can handle it. You could go to him every day and say, God, make me some bread to eat, right? Nobody will fault you for that. You know what might happen? God might just make some bread for you to eat. He might just answer your prayers. He might just move on your behalf. That's fine. It'd be great. He's happy to be hearing from you, happy to be in exchange with you. But I believe prayer also can be something bigger than that. I believe it's also something small that we could exchange for something bigger in our lives. Prayer can be about more than your problems and your concerns and your stresses and your worries. Prayer can be about our future. It could be about something so much bigger. For the next 34 days, you can pray for your own needs and cares. Nobody will fault you. God won't fault you. He might just move on your behalf. He'll absolutely listen. He'll absolutely enter into communion with you. But I want you to consider, what would it look like for you to take this brief season of your life and devote your prayers to our future instead of just your future? Devote your prayers every day just for 34 days. After that, you pray for whatever you want. But what would it look like for me to just say, you know what, prayer's kind of a small thing. It's mine to do with whatever I please. It's in my hands to do. God has given me access and authority to pray for whatever I want, to ask for whatever I want. I won't be faulted for any of it. But what would it look like for me to say, instead of just asking God to turn some stones into bread for me, maybe I'd like to pray for something bigger than that? What would it look like to approach God every day for 34 days and think, I could ask you for some small things, or I could tell you right now, I want to see your church move forward. I want to see people's lives changed because of this church that I'm a part of, because of this thing that I'm doing. I want to see people's lives change forever. I know you'll take care of me. That's small stuff. Can God turn stones to bread? Of course. Small stuff. I know I'm not going to be lost in the shuffle of God's work for other people, so I'm willing to devote a short season of prayer to our future. So I want you to start thinking about our future right now. Who do you want to be a part of our future that's not here yet? Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a family, a neighbor, coworker. Maybe it's a group of people that you just see in Chesterfield County, Midlothian, Powhatan, that you would just sort of say like, or even in Henrico, or wherever it is that you might be, that you would say like, that's a group of, those people, like, I want them to be a part of our future. I want them in on it. Who could that be for you? What work needs to be done in our community? What's missing? What's the missing piece that the gospel could solve in our community? What role could we play? What big vision, big idea could be next for us? I want you to pray for that work to begin. Who in our community is lonely, in need of a Savior? I want you to pray that we would be able to introduce them to Jesus and invite them into our future with us. Can we pause and do that for just a second?